Howdy, folks. This is Jim Tremaine from DJ Times Magazine, America's first magazine for professional DJs, publishing since 1988. And for Twitchers on DJ Times channel, this week brings a double dose of goodness. After Tuesday's trip to London, we return stateside and connect with a talented DJ producer from our nation's capital, the Washington, D.C. based Saeed Younan. Long known for in-house and techno circles as a true practitioner of the genres, the Iraq-born Saeed Younan has circled the globe, playing more than 50 countries in a career that has spanned more than 25 years. He's also been a go-to remixer for a variety of DJs and artists, from Danny Tenaglia to Loco Dice and more. They've all sought Younan's tasty, percussive-based approach to music. But the tribal sound is only one segment that Saeed has mastered, as all will see with his upcoming artist album Morph, which will drop on May 28 on his own label. With Morph, you get big grooves mixed with delectable sounds informed by Saeed's personal journey, and it makes Morph a must-listen for 2021. So Twitchers, please welcome from Washington, D.C., Saeed Younan. How you doing, Saeed?
Doing amazing, man. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. Thanks for doing this. We go back a ways, and I want to, before we start discussing how you've spent the last year and this really terrific record that you have, I want to go back to your beginnings, because obviously your history is pretty remarkable and pretty interesting for anyone who likes musical history and world history. You know, you were born in Iraq and you moved to America as a young teen. Where did your love of music start? When you were young and in Baghdad, what did you like? What were you into?
Man, I was one of the kids that would sit in front of their little tape player with a tape in the deck with the pause button on and the record pushed down. As soon as I hear something on the radio, I unpause the cassette tape to record. I was mainly listening, we're trying to tune in, get some European stations. So we'll get like ABBA and things like that. Just buzzing through coming in, but also listening to a lot of, my parents obviously played a lot of Arabic music in the house. So heavy on percussions, heavy on drums, what the Arabic music is about. So those two worlds kind of came together for me, and is the reason for why my sound is the way it is today.
Yeah, I totally hear that. It's a very natural progression for you. But coming over to the States had to be like a real eye opener. But I remember you told me a story about your immigration into the States. One night you were doing an event for us at the Lima Lounge in DC, which was a wonderful DJ lounge and restaurant on K Street, if I remember right. And it had a wonderful basement room. But you told me the story of how your family decided to move to the States. You were a young teenager when the Iran-Iraq war was going on, and you were essentially forced to make a decision, weren't you?
Yeah. It wasn't like something to take lightly, especially for my parents, because we basically left saying that we're going on vacation, because at the time you couldn't say you're leaving the country. Obviously, it's the government just not having that. So we just left the house, left everything, a couple of suitcases, and saying we'll be back. And we actually just went to England, to London, because that's where my father's brothers were, and we were able to get our paperwork to get out of the country. So yeah, we were basically, fled the country in the middle of the war, and not to come back. And my parents didn't tell me or my sisters that until we left the country, because if the word goes out that that's what we're doing, would have had our...
Wouldn't have been so good, yeah. But ignorance was bliss in that situation. So you came to America in what year?
1982. Okay,
so you came to DC right in the middle of two musical explosions, really. You had the punk scene going on with the Minor Threats of the world, but you also had go-go music with the Trouble Funks.
When we were in London, punk was like full on. I mean, it was a huge time for that. But yeah, exactly. When we came here, go punk and all that stuff was big. That's how I got into skateboarding, I guess.
Sure. But that was like a real scene. It's funny. I just watched a hardcore documentary, and DC was an epicenter for the American hardcore punk scene. That must have been kind of mind blowing to stumble into that.
Yeah, it was everything. I mean, it was a culture shock for me. I mean, I was 11 years old, couldn't even speak a word of English. I mean, even when we were in London, we were only there for like less than a year to get the paperwork done. So when I came here, everything was a shock for me. And just like the music, how people live and all that stuff. Going to school, you know, going back to school, which is kind of a culture shock within itself.
Sure. But when you came over to America, you were hearing hip hop and R&B and dance music and forms of music that I'm guessing you hadn't really been exposed to previously.
Yeah, I mean, especially the hip hop stuff. I mean, to be honest with you, that's how I got into DJing. I mean, by the time I entered high school, I loved DJing. You know, and the only way to DJ is you have to play hip hop, because obviously there's no house or, you know, disco wasn't a young thing, disco music. So hip hop was my way, an avenue to actually play records, to DJ, and that was the thing I discovered first before any electronic music or dance music.
So what were the hip hop records that you loved? Are we talking about Run DMC in that era?
Yeah, Run DMC, D Nice, The Tribe, you know, all that. So actually, even a little bit before The Tribe, like Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, you know,
Sure.
like that stuff.
Now, you said you got into DJing in high school, so you were, I guess, doing some mobile events.
Yeah.
How did you get started doing that?
I had a friend in one of my English classes, and we used to actually skip a class to go to his house before his parents get home and mess around with his turntables. And he started showing me how to scratch. He was a friend with Sir Mix-a-Lot. So, and I guess Sir Mix-a-Lot showed him how to DJ, and he moved here to Washington, D.C. So he showed me how to mix and how to scratch. I started playing all of our high school dances, our proms and stuff like that because of him. So, you know, bringing the turntables and start mixing. So that's how I kind of got into it. It's just basically skipping the last school of class and heading to his house and learning how to mix before his parents came home.
And 6 degrees of separation from Sir Mix-a-Lot, apparently. So, do you remember your first setup? Was it Techniques, or were you like rocking the belt drives?
No, the realistic Radio Shack belt.
Oh boy, okay.
Yeah. And with a mic mixer, so it wasn't even a legit DJ mixer. It was just a volume mixer.
Right, but it worked. You learn how to do that. So let's move a little forward in your DJ career. How did you start to get more into club groovy music? When did you take a turn in your taste, I suppose?
Well, the funny thing is there was a club in DC. This was like right out of high school. Funny enough, it was called Chicago's. It's a club in DC, and that was the first time I heard house music. It was back then. It was like hip house. So you know, this is the first time where I actually heard hip hop mixed with house music. I never even imagined those two worlds would come together. And for me, I'm like, you know, a light bulb went off. I'm like, wait a minute, if people can mix these two together, and this is what I have to play at high school dances, they want hip hop, let me slowly introduce hip house, because it's almost on the same vibe. You know, there's somebody rapping, but it's on a upper beat, you know, upper tempo. Sure. And that actually really works. So I started because of hearing hip house at Chicago's, I started incorporating that in the music at school dances and whatnot. Then a lot of the kids really started digging that. They started telling me, yo, can you come play my house party this weekend? We're going to have a house party. You know, parents are out of town. I was like, yeah, sure. I'll bring all my equipment, all my gear, you know, we'll set up. And I'll slowly start introducing hip house there to a lot of the younger kids. And I really, really got into it. I started, you know, hitting the record shops and learning more about what hip house is. And somebody else introduced me to electronic music, and things just kind of started boiling from there. And it just opened up a whole new world to me, right? Like as soon as I finished high school, was fully on to dance music.
So DJ culture really provided you with something that you belonged to. You kind of found your tribe there. What was the DJ scene in the Beltway like at that time?
It was an early rave. Like we're talking about early 90s. It's like warehouse raves, illegal raves. A lot of that stuff was going on. DC, there was a couple of warehouses, couple of kids that I knew, they were throwing these warehouse raves. Well, they'll invite people, you know, Doc Martin was playing, Ali, like this is before they became even Deep Dish, you know, Dubfire was playing. And we were all like a circle of friends. So we all like shopped at the same record store. We each talked and knew where where the warehouse parties are going to be. Anybody can show up and throw on a record. It wasn't anything like lineups and headliners. It was like, DJ, show up. If you got a record bag with you, get on and play type of thing. So we had a lot of that stuff happen in DC, which was amazing for me, because that gave me a chance to really experiment and play and kind of learn also how to play on a bigger audience, not necessarily kids at a high school dance or an after or a house party. This is like a whole new world. So it made me really understand how to perform in front of people and for like raves like that, and just kind of building a story, building a set around that kind of vibe.
And who were some of the DJs that impressed you during that period?
Well, I grew up around a lot of the Scott Henrys, the Feel Good, DJ Icy. Those were a lot of the guys that frequent DC. They were doing a lot of
breaks.
Yeah, a lot of breaks, Miami breaks. But yeah, that was really big in DC. That's the crew I grew up. There's a local also, Michael Meacham. He had a really great residency at a club called Fifth Column. He invited me to come and play a set, which was like a huge honor for me. I've never, done a big event like that. So it was really cool. Good scene in DC, believe it or not.
Yeah, there's a ton of talent. I mean, even you talk about the George Morels in the world, just whether it's house music or like, siren-y techno music, and, the whole glow scene that was going on. It was all over the map in the Beltway area from Baltimore to DC. Yeah. So how did you move up the ladder? Before we get into making records, was it the raves or was it the clubs that got you really out there?
I used to knock out at least one mixtape a week, So I'll create a lot of mixtapes, and I'm just after the club or even out front, just like how guys would stand outside a club to pass out flyers. I was out there like giving mixtapes, whether it's a promoter or just a person that wants a mixtape. And no, I'm not charging anybody for anything. I'm just like, just want to get my music out there. And fortunate enough, the mixtapes fell in the right hand of the right people. And I was getting called out, hey, we have a slot. Do you want to come in? There's no money. Just, I'm like, I don't care. I just want to play in front of people. So a lot of the gigs came about like that. But things really, really started picking up for me when things started happening outside of Washington, D.C., is when we started a record label and I started getting into producing and making some music. And that was the next level.
You formed a partnership with Palash Ahmed, I believe, and Saeed and Palash, and that's how I first heard of you. And you had the Addictive label, and I just remember Danny Tenaglia was playing a lot of your records at Tunnel and Twilo, and all of a sudden I started getting music from you guys, and and it definitely caught our attention. Talk a little bit about your partnership with Palash.
Yeah, that started, we were always in the same circle. So like we'll shop at the same record store. We did parties in DC, but we really actually kind of started working together. It's when we found out we're both at the same college. So we both went to VCU. That was like in the early 90s, mid 90s.
In Richmond, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then we decided, well, I started throwing small parties just to kind of make some money to pay for my apartment. And I knew he was there. I was like, yo, why don't you just, come and play at my parties? Let's do some gigs together. So we started doing gigs together. I booked him at my parties. Then we started talking about how the music is, we're DJs. We get into this discussion about, this, we can't find this is the kind of music I like, but I can't seem to find it and blah, blah. And then we're like, why don't we just start a record label? Because at that time, progressive music was becoming big, progressive house. We liked tribal, but we wanted to kind of bring those two worlds together. So we're like, why don't we start a label, take that European progressive sound, but add that New York tribal to it. And at that time, I think Tribal America was already doing that. So we're on that same vision as well.
With a very European sound.
Yeah. So we started Addictive Records, not anything as, oh, we're going to become Saeed and Palash or whatever. We just started producing together and putting out the tracks because me and him, it's like Saeed and Palash. Then people caught on as us being the partner. So we started getting phone calls. Hey, we want to book Saeed and Palash. We're like, okay, I guess this is going to work as a partnership thing because that name kind of is ringing to people. So we started putting out more tracks. The more tracks we put out, the more phone calls we were getting about getting booked. And at the time, me and Palash also had a full-time job. I was working for America Online, and he was working for Ernest & Young or somebody. So like we had to balance a real career with something that we were passionate about, and travel on the weekends and try to avoid not being late to come back to work on Mondays. It was a lot of juggling.
Right, but you got your name out there, and you also got a lot of real prime remixes. I don't even know how many remixes you guys did. I mean, the one that I remember the most, it was one of the last ones. It was the Underground from Saleda, which was an anthem here in New York, and your remix was heard every weekend, many times.
Yeah, yeah, that went to #1 on Billboard, and it was big. It was definitely a big deal, you know. So it was amazing. We had some great stuff. We also, you know, like you said, Danny Tenaglia was pretty much rocking everything we put out, and he actually got a lot of our stuff on DAT before it was even pressed, not even on CD or vinyl. We'll send him the actual DAT and like, yo, if you can play this, it's yours, you know.
Right, and let's talk a little bit about that period. It was a sort of a classic period of a New York house and sort of East Coast house, which a lot of people sort of fetishize now. I mean, it really was great. I'm not saying it wasn't, but do you find it interesting that now a lot of the kids who weren't around then look back at that time and still embrace that sound?
Yeah, I mean, to me, you know, like how they have the East Coast, West Coast hip hop thing. It's not a rival, but you can definitely tell the producers and the DJing happens on the East Coast compared to the West Coast.
Hard Kiss was very different from Danny Tenaglia. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and it's really cool. And there are kids now that used to party, or the big head promoters now, who still champion that sound, and they're always like, "Yo, man, that tribal, that East Coast tribal is nothing like it." And it's still to this day, it's honoring, and it's really flattering to hear people talk about how, you know, people like myself and others, or the people who kind of champion that sound and kind of put it in the forefront, and it's a signature sound that we East Coast people have, you know, that's just, I don't think anybody can, you know, replicate.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because when you get outside of New York, you hear a lot of tribal at a lot of gay clubs, whereas in New York, straight, gay, didn't matter. It was like everybody loved that sound.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's why I think I love taking trips to New York all the time. You know, it's like whenever chance I get, I'll just hop on a Greyhound just to go party at Twilo, at Palladium. You know, back in the day, I mean, those were the places that inspired the hell out of me when it came to music. I used to go to Twilo, hear Tenaglia, get back on the Greyhound, and come straight home, get in the studio, like with no sleep, because that's how inspired I used to get.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard that story from a lot of remixer producers. So let's talk a little bit more about your evolution. You guys broke up in what year was it?
2004.
Okay, but you started to get some really big gigs, and you broke away solo. Talk a little bit about how that opened up your possibilities as a global DJ. You actually got to go see a lot of the great clubs around the world.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really difficult time. Not only did I break up with my partner, but it's the time when vinyl was kind of fading off, and, you know, there was MP3s, there was Napster. We weren't able to sell any records. We were getting more boxes back from distribution than we were sending out, you know. It was just a difficult time, and I totally get it. You know, Palash, he was having a family. He was just getting married. He needs to think long term, and what we were doing obviously wasn't stable, and I totally get it. But for me, you know, I was still, you know, single, and this is like my passion. This is the only thing I ever wanted. Like when I left AOL, I made a promise to myself that I'm not gonna look back no matter what, and I'm gonna ride this tide till no end. So and that was my vision from day one. So I decided to stick with it. I like, okay, fine, I'm gonna be a solo artist. I'm gonna start a digital label. I didn't want to take Addictive Records and then turn it to a digital label. I just wanted to start from scratch. I used my last name because it was already incorporated. I didn't think it was gonna last as long as it has. I launched Younan Music in 2004, and it was just my corporation name, and so, you know, it's been going on for this long. So I launched that, started releasing digital music, and but yeah, it just, I never looked back, and I had a lot of, you know, great fortunate things happen to me along the way, like, you know, hooking up with Carl Cox, who loves the label. He's always supportive of all the music, working with other artists, doing a lot of collaborations. It's actually very hard for a duo or a group, nevertheless, to split up and go on your own, because you're basically back to where you started and kind of have to build everything again. Nobody's gonna want to book a single person from a duo, because they'll always like, well, you know, we need both of you guys to make it work. Or, I mean, I've seen this happen to, I don't want to drop any names, but a lot of DJs that were duos, they actually just did not make it, but, or one of them, you know, fell off or whatever. But sure. I was fortunate enough, man, just to, I was just hustling, and thankfully it worked out the way it did.
But you also had a scene around you there in DC. I mean, it was always nice to be able to walk into a club with a nice sound system, with an audience that really appreciates you. I mean, I really remember that night at the Lima Lounge. There was a lot of love in the room for you, and you know, you were maintaining a residency, and it seemed like you had a whole lot of regulars coming out.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think the best thing about DC, and I guess it's because I've been here so long, I know I grew up with a lot of these guys, and a lot of the guys I grew up with now have kids. And these kids, they say, yo, my dad told me to come check you out. You know, it's like, it's kind of crazy knowing how old I am now. And I met somebody the other day, actually, they told me that they saw me at a club when they were only 16, and like, they can't believe it. You know, they've watched my whole career, how it's gone. And they're like, I got into the club illegally. I had a fake ID. And now, you know, it's just great. And I think the people that do follow you in DC and know what you've done, those are the people who really appreciate who you are and what you know, how far you've come, especially in a business that's, you know, how tough this is. So
sure, yeah, it changes all the time, and technology is just part of it. So let's talk a little bit about DJing, because you know, you go back to the old days. You said you started playing on realistic turntables. Let's very briefly give a rundown of your DJ evolution. You started with the belt drives and the realistic. Where did you go?
And the dime on top.
Yes. Okay. And so I guess when you got your hands on some 1200s, that must have been like amazing. Oh, yeah. And
I think the beauty of it is when you learn on a belt drive, like the realistic, when you get 1200s, you can basically do it with your eyes closed, because before it was so much tougher to just cue up, and you know, needle skipping everywhere. So I bought used realistics from an old school hip hop guy that decided he doesn't want to DJ anymore. You know, he's gone to the family thing, and believe it or not, until maybe about a couple of years ago, those still the same turntables I still had in my studio. Because I end up upgrading, getting some new turntables. But so I got the turntables. I can't remember what mixer I had when I got the 1200. I think it was a Newmark mixer, but I can't remember what. But yeah, so I upgraded to that. Obviously, that made me even a better DJ with everything that I was doing. And yeah, now I still have the 1200. I've got a small Pioneer mixer, and I try to keep it really minimum in my studio, because I don't do that much mixing. And when I do travel, everything is there for me. This is just for my own personal use. And yeah, and I've got a couple of CDJs that I use just for fun in the studio.
Do you like the old school knob mixers, like a lot of the deep house guys?
You know, I don't. I like the faders, man.
Okay. Because of your hip hop background. There you go.
Yeah, so I use that, and I don't know. For me, it's just it doesn't feel natural to do this all the time. Maybe it's my shoulders. I don't know.
Some guys can make it look natural. You know, I'm sure you've seen Joe Claussell rocking it.
Yeah. No, I know some guys who, man, they can destroy on a rotary. It's amazing.
It is. So today, I noticed on some of the live streams, you were doing some vinyl sets. But are you, if you were going to go out and play a club today, would you be using USBs, or are you using a DVS? What is your platform?
I use USBs, but I like to use 3 or 4 decks, because I also layer with acapellas, and I'll put like a delay paddle on one of the CDJs just to bypass, just to add more delays, because some of the acapellas you get, a lot of them are just dry and they're just like boring. But adding a little delay on them that goes strictly just to that one CDJ and doesn't affect what else you're playing, it's my go-to thing. I like to keep it really simple, but also kind of remix on the fly in a way.
I was watching some of the live streams you did. I think it was a venue called Techo.
Oh, Techo.
Techo. Sorry, folks. Let's get that right. But I was really taken by that. You know, obviously, you're still working your DJ chops, but you don't have an audience. How did you approach those sets?
Man, that was it is kind of weird, you know, like not playing for the audience and looking at your laptop to, you know, to look at anybody's communicating with you. But the guys at Tetra were pretty cool. They had some people there, you know, just kind of watching and listening from the outside of the booth. But it was a good, for me, it was nice because I got to play a vinyl set and being in a club kind of atmosphere, which I haven't done in a while, which is something I'm actually I might do this starting this year, do special vinyl sets at certain clubs if they have the right equipment, right sound system. But it's interesting, man. It's an interesting time just to doing what we're doing, like what we're doing right now as well. Just everything is, you know, either Zoom or Twitch or you know, Facebook Live, whatever. It's weird without an audience. Like I did another one in my basement, in my /basement studio the other day, and it just felt weird because you're trying to get into it, but you're looking at a flat wall in front of you. It's just kind of weird.
It is weird, but I gotta say, I was watching one of the sets last week, and it did translate, and I think, quite honestly, a lot of it just had to do with the selections that you were playing. You know, you started strong and you kept my attention. So, you know, you had a pretty quick lift off. So you got me. Let's move on to the record. Morph is a really, I think is it 13 or 14 tracks?
13.
13. I gotta say, if you're an old school house fan like I am, who likes the tribal sound, the percussive vibe, the real kind of like hip swinging kind of thing, that's all over it in spades. But you also have elements of techno in there. You even have like a drum and bass track sort of towards the end, which was a real surprise. You have different vocalists on there doing things. You got a little gospel vibe here and there. What went into that? I mean, I know that you had started the record before COVID. Give us a little background on creating the Morph album.
Yeah, so it's a selection of different tracks from different times. So what I do a lot of times, I'll start a track maybe and I don't feel where it's going, so I kind of put it aside. I say, look, I'll check back on that track later. With this album, that happened a lot. A lot of the tracks that you hear is something that I've started, then I brought it back in because my ideas came together. I've always been the kind of person who's like, I don't like to force anything in the studio. If it's just not there, there's no need to just bang it to the head till it's done, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to be happy, you know, it coming out or me playing it. So I'd rather put them away and come back and focus on it later. So that went on for some of these tracks. Some of these tracks on here, I probably started on them, well, not all of them, one or two of them, like to 2012, and I had put them away. They came back and reconstructed around maybe one sound or one loop. So what I'll do is I'll start with a project, and if I'm not feeling it, I'll do a quick bounce. I'll call it sample bounce. And when I go back and visit it, I don't have to open the entire project. I just go listen to the sample bounce just to kind of bring me back to that day of what I did. And if an idea sparks me right there and then, I'm like, all right, let me open up the project and I'll start working on it. So that goes on as well. And the reason for the tracks, like you mentioned, there's drum and bass, there's down tempo, there's all kind of stuff in here. Is this album, I wanted to show people, compared to my previous albums, which weren't really albums, they were just like mixed compilations of my tracks, but it's remixes of other. This is all comprised of my own production, 100%. Couple of collaborations and featured artists here and there, but it is all my production. And I wanted to show people that, look, I'm not a one-trick pony. I don't just do dance club tracks. I want you to see that this is bringing you into my world of music, of what I do, what I enjoy, what I like listening to, and what I'm able to do. So, and for you guys to enjoy this as an artist album, not just something you're gonna pop because you want to play it in the club or whatnot.
Yeah, and what I love is the real through line to the album is those percussive elements that are you. I mean, when I think of your productions and your remixes, and even your sets, that's what I think of. And that is pretty much throughout the record. It's not all of that, but it's pretty much there. And that kept my attention, and I recommend it to a lot of folks. So in 2021, are we going to see remixes? What are we looking for the rest of the year?
Yeah, I'm trying to get the bulk of it remixed right now. We've definitely got a couple of remixes lined up. I think we're dropping like one remix a month. So far, we've got the first 3 remixes lined up. But I mean, for example, I mean, I don't want to give away too much right now, but there are remixes coming out for after the album drops on May 28th. There's a remix coming out, a single coming out in June. Then there's one in July. Then
what's the first single?
It's by Hector Cotto. It's the Church of Bass featuring Vornai. Okay. So that will be the first single, and that's already massive, man. I mean, the original is already huge. The bass line is just crazy, but what Hector did to it is it's taken it to another level, which is really amazing.
Cool. We're looking forward to that. Let's get really quickly into your studio. We don't have to go down the full-on rabbit hole of every plug-in you're using, but give us an idea of the main elements of your studio, your DAW. If you have any vintage pieces, what are your monitors?
Right now, let's see. Well, I use Logic. That's my go-to, my go-to DAW as far as production. I use Ableton as well, but I use Ableton only to do like edits and quick mashups and stuff like that. I do everything in the box basically, so I like to keep it really simple. Mm-hmm. During COVID, I had to downsize a lot, believe it or not, just to kind of rearrange some things in my studio. So I condensed everything into a much smaller. So I've got, I use the Focal for my monitors. I have like a mic preamp. I have my old DAT player. That's probably the only thing that's vintage I have, because I have a boxes of DATs, which back in the day, I don't know if you remember, you couldn't buy sample CDs. You had to get them by DAT somehow. I don't know how I got them, but I've got a box full of just sample loops that, royalty-free sample loops. They're all on DAT. So
big fat DAT tapes.
Yeah, big fat DAT. And I like to kind of refer back to those and pull some stuff out. So I still have my DAT player. So that's probably the vintage thing I have. And my vinyl records, which I still have a huge, even though I sold a lot of my doubles just to make more room, I still have a huge catalog of vinyl records, which I go back and sample. I'm super old school. My approach is still my approach from the early 90s, which is sample base, either record or DAT or whatever, and then build something around those samples and just cut a lot of chopping up and cutting up.
So are the percussive elements always samples, or are there plugins that you use that really serve your purpose? Because again, I would say that that's probably the essence of your sound.
Yeah, no, I use plugins. I mean, I love Ultrabeat, right, inside of Logic. That's my go-to for a lot of my drumming programming. I use Rob Pappen for all my bass lines, the sub bass boom. That's a go-to because I just love the low end on that, and it's just really clean and well-rounded. I don't have to mess with it too much. I like to work fast. I like to have a fast workflow, because when I get stuck on something, I tend to kind of veer away from the original idea. The only thing I spend probably the most time on in every track is my bass lines. I sit there and I'll just slowly just shape it and carve it until I get it just right. And I feel like that's probably my signature when it comes to my tracks. If the bass line is right, everything else just flows around it. It's just the way I look at things.
Yeah, it's all in the groove, and there's a whole lot of groove going on Morph. Before we wrap it up, just a couple more questions. Who are some producers that you're feeling these days?
Wow. Let's see. I mean, one of the guys I always loved, and he's a good friend of mine, and I think he still does amazing stuff since day one. David Herrero. He's I think one underrated underrated producer. He's a humble, great kid. I had that opportunity to play with him. Hector Cotto, which he's doing a remix of mine. I love his style. He's also driving, and he's got that groove with his tracks. Those two guys, I really love what they're doing.
Let's talk about the short-term future in terms of clubs and festivals and the idea of getting out there in front of people again. Talk a little bit about how much you're looking forward to that and how you actually expect to approach that period of time.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it looks like things are opening back up now. So slowly, DC just announced that hopefully by the end of June, I believe, early July, everything's going to be back to 100%, which is great. I think we just got to, approach everything with cautions. A lot of people are still kind of iffy. You can feel it as like they don't know if they should be going out or if these things should be open. I'm very open-minded. I think if things are ready to open up, promoters should obviously, have all the precautions in line and know that if it's not done right, that there are consequences. But I am ready, man. I think a year and a half of a lockdown, not being able to be anywhere or play anywhere, is a long time for artists like myself and others who just, we need that. It's part of our blood. We have to entertain. We want to see smiling faces on the dance floor. We want to see hands in the air. Not to sound egotistic or anything, but you want to feel appreciated, So, and then I think we need that.
Yeah, DJs need immediate feedback, and whether it's indoors or outdoors. I can't wait myself. And it's funny, I think part of the reason why I was digging your record so much is because it put my head back in the middle of a dance floor.
Amazing. I'm really happy to hear that. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So terrific. Thank you so much for doing this. We greatly appreciate it. We're looking forward to a big year with Morph and all of the remixes. Anything else we can look forward to in 2021 with Saeed?
No, just the album. The remixes will be coming out, and definitely on tour. That's 100%. The album, we rescheduled this album to come out this year because of COVID last year, and we had a huge tour lined up too. So we're gonna be doing it again this year, and I'll be hopefully in your town, and I hope I get to see you and have a drink with you sometime.
If you're in New York, I will see you for sure. Thanks so much for doing this, Saeed. I greatly appreciate it.
I appreciate it, buddy. Take care.
Alrighty. Sure.